Yo, here we have a version 3 gearbox with a motor cage. Very beautiful. I love motor cages. This particular gearbox is from my CZ Bren that I had just called done. However, right before I handed it off to the owner, I decided to test fire it one more time and I was greeted with a very disgusting grinding sound. Fired a few more times, got the same sound, and actually it got a little worse each pull. So I decided that's enough, opened it up, and then I realized that I had destroyed some gears. 3 teeth are missing off the spur, bevel, and we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teeth from the small set, as well as, where is it? Some of the 90-degree teeth are ground down a bit. These are both King Arms gears that were originally inside this ASG CZ Bren. Not really good for my confidence in King Arms parts, but yeah, these are broken. So I ordered new ones, and I will be replacing everything in here. SHS/Rocket, they're just rebranded. I also grabbed some 7mm bushings from FLT, because this sounds okay, but I feel like I could get the shimming a little bit better if I had some lower profile bushings. Let's get started. You might have noticed that there was a bevel in here already, even though this was the one that was originally in there that broke. I don't remember why I put one in there, but it was there. It will no longer be there. Okay, let's get the rest of this apart. Let's check this air seals while we're here. Remove this board. Come right out. Cool. This could actually use a little bit of a cleaning. So here we go. All right, let's pop these bushings out and put the new ones in. Put the new bushings in with some super glue to make sure they don't move. Now I'm gonna scrape off all the excess glue on this side. Shimming time? Step 1, motor height. Put the bevel in. Fix the motor cage to the gearbox just enough so that the motor cage is in line with the gearbox. 1 screw is enough in my case. Then I'll proceed to move the motor until the pinion is where I want it to be. I'm happy with that. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera, but it's where I want it. Once that is done, next is bevel height. We set the pinion to mesh this way nicely. Now we have to move the bevel up and down so it meets the pinion just enough and no more. In order to achieve that, we'll put some shims on this side, the flat side of the bevel gear. For starters, I will take this 0.2. That squeaking sound is something inside the bushing, causing the axle to scrape against it and make lots and lots of noise. Let me try to clear it out. It's gone. We will need both halves of the shell. Put the motor on. With the bevel's flat side on the right hand side of the gearbox, I will try to press the whole gear, the left, to meet the pinion. So far there seems to be 0.1 millimeter of movement, which is actually pretty dang good. So take everything apart. And from here, you could put a 0.1 in here, but I'm going to choose to put a 0.3 shim on instead. 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, where are the 0.3s? Been doing this for a while, so I can pretty much guess what the shim thickness is based on touch, but this should be 0.3. 0.3-ish, yeah, 0.3. And that seems to be under 0.1 millimeter of movement, which is good, but I'm gonna try to get that even smaller using a little bit of a trick. This is a 0.3 shim, and it is approximately 0.3 millimeters in thickness. This is a 0.2 shim, which is approximately 0.2 millimeters thick. And this is a 0.1 shim, which is approximately 0.1 millimeter thick. Mathematically, you add them together and you would think you have a 0.3 shim. However, that's not the case. With manufacturing tolerances, blah, 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 what you might come up with is a combined actual shimming thickness of a little bit over 0.3 millimeters, which is what I'm taking advantage of here to get that tiny bit of play out of the system. And now he's moving even less, which is expected, but he's still moving. I'd say that's down to 1/100th of a millimeter of movement left, maybe even 2/100ths. I'm very confident that is exactly where I want that bevel gear. All right, that is the hardest part of shimming out of the way. Next, we will just shim this gear in place. As you can see, he's moving around a lot right now. We don't want that. That's about 0.5, 0.6 of a gap. So I'm going to now take all of this apart again, put the motor aside, and grab a 0.5 and 0.1 shim to see if that clears this gap for us. This is conveniently a 0.5 ready to go, and I don't have any 0.1s available, so I'm just going to check free-handed if this is good enough. And it's not. So now I'm going to have to find a 0.1. That is a 0.1. Put both of them on. Again, freehand check. That's less than 0.1 of movement. So we're going to put the screws back in and check again. And he is spinning freely. But barely moving along the axle, which is very, very good. I'm going to call the bevel done. Next, our job with the spur is to make sure that the outer ring teeth mesh well with the smaller set of teeth on the bevel, somewhere around there. Personally, I like to put this smack center on those teeth on the bevel, so that's what I'm going to do. Spur in, then the bevel on top, and see how they're meshing. I'm not sure if you can see on the camera. The bevel is floating about 0.5 above the spur, which is expected because that's about how much I put on the bevel. So now we have to compensate by putting roughly the same amount on the spur. So I'm putting mathematically 6 millimeters of shimming on the bottom of the spur gear. Oh no. Come back. And let's see how that lines up. I like that. I like that a lot. We're going to call the bevel to spur shimming done. Now, just like the bevel, we need the spur to stay still inside the gearbox, not move around like this. Interestingly enough, the spur is already pretty much where I want it. If anything, I'll put a 0.1 on this side and see how that goes. And check if I can move the spur back and forth. Not really. And it's also kind of squishing on it. That means there's no space on this half of the gearbox shell for a shim, which is unfortunate. I want at least a 0.1 shim on either side. Luckily, we have a little bit of wiggle room on the other half of the shell. We just have to change this 0.2 to a 0.1, and we have conveniently right here a 0.1 shim. With that, we should have shims on both sides of the gear as I want, and we should still be able to spin it. Yep. Spins freely and doesn't move axially any considerable amount. Nice. That is the spur done. Next, spur to sector. We will need to get the inner ring of teeth on the spur to line up with the bottom set of teeth on the sector, preferably as low as possible before these flat faces start grinding against each other. Let's see where we're at. The sector is actually floating on this side of the axle. That's because it is riding on top of the spur gear right now. The way I do the sector and spur shimming is actually flip the gearbox over so that the teeth that pull the piston are down towards gravity, and we will shim the sector up until just before it meets with the spur gear. Gonna put them on the top side of the gear and then put the gear back in. Gearbox half on and flip it over and see how we are. And that is just perfect. Now that I know the height to put the sector at to mesh with the spur gear, we move on to shimming the sector in place so he doesn't move around either. And he's moving quite a bit. Let's put, what, 0.3 in there? Put him on there and try again. And I was a little off. I think it's about 0.5 of distance. So let's put a 0.2 on there to get him a little over 0.5 and see what that turns out to look like. And check. And that's pretty good-ish. Could be better. Let's try putting some screws on, see where that gets us. Ooh. That is exactly where I want him to be. All right, now we can put the whole gear train together.